Okay, good afternoon. My name is Rabbi Chaim Faecher. I'm speaking to you from the Mussar room in Yishuv Mezad in Gush Etzion in Eretz Israel, Eretz HaKodesh. Before I speak what I'd like to say, I first want to ask a blessing from Hashem, a little prayer that the Hafetz Chaim wrote in the Sefer Hafetz Chaim in his introduction. He said, "Blessed is Hashem, the God of Israel, who separated us from all the other nations. He gave us His Torah. He brought us into Eretz Israel so that we would have the opportunity to fulfill all His mitzvahs. His sole intention in doing this was for our own benefit, to enable us to become holy, and to enable us to receive His goodness and abundant kindness in this world and in the world to come." So I would want to make a blessing that Hashem should bless this speech, that it should be help to bring closer the final redemption and Hashem's purpose, why He created the world and the Jewish people, what He hopes for eternity. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Rabbi Chaim Faecher. I was responsible, and Hashem gave me a blessing to be able to build this base Mussar, and it took 2.5 years. Hashem finally blessed it, and we'll speak a little bit later about what's a base Mussar, but in any case, I've been here in the Yishuv many years, 32 years. I studied and have been studying in Jerusalem, in Kollel, in Rabbi Diaspora Yeshiva. Rabbi Goldstein, my Rabbi, so he traces back his Mussar traditions back to Rabbi Yisrael Salant and back to the Vilna Gaon. Now, how we understand this? My Rabbi, he learned 15 years in Yeshiva Hafetz Chaim in New York by Rav Henrik Leibowitz. Rav Henrik Leibowitz learned by his father, Rav David Leibowitz. Rav David Leibowitz learned in Slobodka Yeshiva by the Rav Nassim Tzvi Finkel, the Alter of Slobodka. The Alter of Slobodka learned by Rav Simcha Zisel, who was the Alter of Kelm, and the Alter of Kelm learned by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So I have a tradition handed down through the generations of what is Mussar, and I want to give a Mussar smooze, but in order to do that, I want to first explain what is Mussar, and what is a Mussar smooze, and what is a Mussar room. So I'll give a small definition from the book of Majesty of Man, which is Rav Henrik Leibowitz's Talmidim they wrote, and over there they describe what is, first of all, what is Mussar. Mussar, they say, life is a battle for perfection. Our eternal adversary, the Yetzer Hara, is the evil inclination. He is a formidable opponent. Mussar is what? It's a battle plan, an approach to fight the fierce onslaught of the Yetzer Hara in a systematic, scientific manner. The goal is to bridge the gap between the intellect and the heart. Mussar is a practical program for self-mastery, controlling one's passions and elevating ourselves to ever higher levels of perfection. Okay, so that's basically what is Mussar. Now Mussar has 3 parts to it in the system. It has the intellectual study of Mussar. It's called Hachmas Mussar. It has Limud Mussar bis Pilas, the study of Mussar concepts in an emotional fashion, which is what's done in the Mussar room here. And then it has the third element. It has Hinuk Mussar, the practical implementation of the Mussar principles. But now we're focused on the study of Mussar in an emotional fashion. So that's the nature of Mussar. Now we talk about what is a Mussar smooze, which is about to give. So we have a little definition here of what's a Mussar smooze. This is the second. It says over here, he says the Slobodka approach, Slobodka where the Alter of Slobodka taught, their approach to Mussar was to give Mussar smoozes. It's a discourse, and it's grounded in pure, straightforward, unadulterated meanings of Medrash, Talmud, Rishonim. Every Chiddush, every Mussar smooze is deduced from a question and the answer is the Mussar Smooth, and that's what I want to give over a Mussar Smooth, to ask a question and give an answer. And okay, good. So now, what is a Mussar room, which we're in now? We're sitting in the Mussar room of Mezad. So we have a Faecher here that explains that the Sefer of Or Yisrael by Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer. He was one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He explains what he understood from his Rebbe. What is a Mussar room? Mussar room, we say like this. We say it's a special location for studying Mussar, a special place. Now, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter felt it's very strongly to maximize the benefit of Mussar study. It's critical to have a special location to do it. Okay, so he says that Mussar study is essential to a man in the life of his soul, and when you study Mussar in this kind of place, it's to straighten and remove all hindrance and blocks to being successful in studying the Mussar, that it'll affect the person's heart to the end, and the main benefit will be that when you learn a base Mussar, you'll have passion in trying to connect yourself to Hashem and to study the Mussar Sefer with great fervor, as much as your heart desires. So when you'll do that, you'll be able to affect your soul very much. You'll shake your soul, you melt your heart, and the spirit of a person will be subdued all your day. So that is the function of a base Mussar which we're sitting in. Okay, so now we want to start with the Mussar Smooths. So the Mussar Smooths that I want to say over, which we printed in Hebrew, but we're going to speak it over in English. It starts with a question, like we said. So the question of that we want to start with is: are we obligated? Is a person obligated to learn Mussar in a Mussar room? That's the question. So good. So now, in order to give an answer to that question, so I'm going to present the smooths. So the first step of building the answer is that we have a statement by Harav Hagon Rev Gershon Edelstein Kodesh Levraka. He was the last Gadol Ador. He passed away recently, and he said a very strong, simple statement. He said, Limud Mussar Chayev v'kedai. He said the learning of Mussar, a person's obligated. It's an obligation, and it's very worthwhile for a person. That's what he said. So now let's try to explain what did he mean by that. What was the basis of his statement? And from that we're going to learn the value of the obligation of Mussar in a Mussar room. So it says in the Mishnah Brura, if we look in Siman Aleph, Sifkat and Yud Beis, what does it say over there? It says, V'tzori ha'adam, and the man needs the koveya to arrange lo for himself, as a limud, to arrange for himself, to learn Sifrei Mussar, books of Mussar, v'kol yom v'yom, every day and day, Mr. Brura says, a man has to arrange a fixed time every day and day to learn books of Mussar. Mishnah Brura says that. That's the first step. Second step we say is another statement from the Mishnah Brura, which is in Siman Tuf Reish Daled Sifkat and Beis. What does it say over there? It says the Arizal Zikron Avacha. The Arizal wrote, She'achayev limud b'sifrei Mussar, that a person's obligated to learn books of Mussar, Kol Hashanah, the whole year. The whole year means Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the whole year. The Arizal says there's an obligation on a person to learn books of Mussar. And now the Mishnah Brura continues, and it says, in Kach Kasuv, and similarly wrote Hagroa, the Vilna Gaon also wrote, the Mishlei, he wrote in Mishlei, B'kama Makamot, in various places in Mishlei, he wrote the same thing, that a person's obligated whole year to learn Sifrei Mussar, all the whole year. Okay, good. Now, the next step that we want to say is that the Chaim, that we have a book of the Chaim about his life. That I'm going to quote from this book. This is a very important book, The Life of the Hafetz Chaim. It was written originally in Yiddish, and it was translated into Hebrew, and then it came into English eventually. The one who wrote the book was a Talmud, a student of the Hafetz Chaim himself. He had very close relationship with the Hafetz Chaim. The Hafetz Chaim gave him smicha. Very few people at Hafetz Chaim he gave smicha to the Rabbi who wrote the book in Yiddish originally, and it was translated, so that we can rely very strongly on this book, where it says, which we're going to quote in the next thing we want to say, and it says, Rav Chaim Ozer, he was the Gadol Dor in that time, he wrote a very warm and enthusiastic appreciation of the truth and the value of this book. So we can rely on what we're going to say from this book, that it was true about the Hafetz Chaim. And we know, my Rabbi taught many times, he said that halacha l'maisa, the halacha of a person, in reality, can not only be learned from the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah, and also, if you have an action of a gadol b'Torah, a great man of Torah, if you see him do something, so halacha can be based on that. So that's why we're going to talk about what the Hafetz Chaim did, because it shows we know how great the Hafetz Chaim was, and certain things he wrote about his life, what he did, we can write his halacha mamish from the Hafetz Chaim. Okay, good. So now we're going to make a quote over here from this book that we have the English version over here. So what's the first thing that we want to quote over here? 1 second. Yeah, you say the chapter here, the chapter called Master of Halacha, chapter 59, he wrote over here in the book, he showed, in the talks to his yeshiva students, the Hafetz Chaim would always have with him a copy of Shari Tshuva. That was the Hafetz Chaim, when he taught in Radin, in Europe, when he taught his Talmidim, he always had a copy of Shari Tshuva by Rabbeinu Yonah. And he would base his words on it. His words of Mussar, you give his Talmidim in Radin, he'd base his words on Shari Tshuva. Okay, so that's a very important thing to know, that how much the Hafetz Chaim valued the Shari Tshuva of Rabbeinu Yonah, and we're going to quote Rabbeinu Yonah a little bit later to just understand the value of Rabbeinu Yonah. Okay, so now the next step we want to say over here is that okay, so now we understand that Rav Edelstein, when he said there's an obligation and it's worthwhile, so we understand the obligation from the Mishnah Berurah and two places. We see where the obligation is coming from that he's speaking about. And now we want to ask the question, when he said it's worthwhile, it's kedai, so how do we understand that it's worthwhile to learn Mussar, the obligation of learning Mussar? So now I want to answer that question. So the first step to answer that question is, it says that from this book of the Hafetz Chaim and his life, that we want to say his relationship to Rav Yisrael Salanter. So I'm going to read you what they said about the Hafetz Chaim, about Rav Yisrael Salanter, because in the end we're going to base why it's worthwhile on Rav Yisrael Salanter. This is part of our Masorah. So it says in this book on the Hafetz Chaim's life, it says here, among those who listened attentively to Rav Yisrael Salanter's words and revered him was the Hafetz Chaim. The Hafetz Chaim would speak about him, about Rav Yisrael Salanter, and he quote his words with affection and high regard. He said, the greatness of Rav Yisrael Salanter, the Hafetz Chaim would say, exceeded the level of his generation. He was, the Rav Yisrael Salanter, according to Hafetz Chaim, he was sent from on high, from Shemayim, to teach the world the fear of heaven. He was a holy angel of God. His words were words of a living God, flashing flames of fire. At times he had Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of Hashem, would manifest itself in his base medrash. So he said, okay, good. So you see who was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in the eyes of the Hafetz Chaim. Okay, so now the next step we want to say is, Okay. Now we understand who is Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Now let's see what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said about a base Mussar, because that's what really our question was, to learn Mussar. We understand the obligation. Why is it worthwhile to do it in a base Mussar? So let's see what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said about learning in a base Mussar. So we'll take the book of Or Yisrael. It was translated in English by one of the Talmidim Bar Yeshiva. It took him 10 years. Rabbi Sven Miller took 10 years to and he has a lot of haskamas. And so in letter 13 of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, he wrote in Or Yisrael, what does he say over there? Make a quote to the point in the 13th letter. So what he said here, studying in the base Mussar, he said, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter wrote in his letter, studying in the base Mussar, it's not a virtue, and it's not an indication of a high level of a person. You think maybe a person has to be a very high level to study Mussar in a base Mussar. It's such a refined, special place only for great rabbis. And he says, no, it's not a virtue, it's not an indication of a high level. Rather, what is it, according to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter? It's an absolute requirement. You see, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said clearly, to study Mussar in a base Mussar, it's an absolute requirement. It's not a special high level. It's an absolute requirement. So you see, okay, good. So now we're going to say over here the next step. So now, what is that requirement? What are we going to accomplish by studying Mussar, which we already defined Mussar? But what is Mussar going to accomplish? Why it's so worthwhile for a person, and why base Mussar? Because it's a special environment that will be a special success and ability to go to the depths of ourselves to understand what we're studying. You know, what is so special about studying Mussar in that kind of environment, the success that will come from a base Mussar. So now we're going to quote from Shari Tshuva, Rabbeinu Yonah, which we see the Chaim said clearly that Shari Tshuva of Rabbeinu Yonah was such a special book. He always taught from it and based his words upon it. So what does it say in Shari Tshuva? So let's see what it says in Shari Tshuva. So if we look in Shari Tshuva of Rabbeinu Yonah, who was one of the great Rishonim of all the times. And so what does he say? So if we look there in the second gate, the Sar Sheni, okay, so we see in Shari Tshuva in the second gate, in the 26th os, that's called oses, like, what does he say over there? So what does Rabbi Rabbeinu Yonah say in chapter 2, the 26th statement? He says, he's talking about Pirkei Avos 1:14 of Hillel. He said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And what does it mean? He said, if a person, he says, Rabbeinu Yonah says, if a person doesn't stir his soul to wake it up, what is it going to help Mussar? Because in the day, even though the Mussar may penetrate his heart, the day that he hears the Yetzirah will cause it to be forgotten, removed from his heart. So he says, on the basis of that, he says what he continues, and he goes a little bit further, skipping a little bit. He says like this. He says, when a person listens to Mussar, he must arouse his soul. He has to arouse his soul, and he has to impress the words of Mussar on his heart. He should mull over these words constantly. He should learn from them, and from the depths of his heart, speak to himself. He has to commune with the inner chambers of his spirit. And he has to turn over that Mussar upon himself, and he has to this self admonition that he has to give himself should be on a regular and continuous basis. And what he says, this self admonition that he's giving himself, this Mussar, it should be on a regular and continuous basis until the person accepts the Mussar. And until he's purified. See, purified. See, that's one point I would bring out. That that purified is very important. He's going to purify his soul. Then Rabbi Yonah continues, he says, even when I'm for myself with all my might to make my soul straight, when I'm not for myself and not making the effort to learn Mussar and to bother to mend my soul, to fix my soul. So there's two qualities you see from Rabbi Yonah. There's the purifying the soul and fixing the soul. And my Rebbe, Rabbi Mordechai Goldstein's Kodesh Levachi, he said one of the main purposes why a person his soul was sent him from Hashem in the Shemayim, in this world, is to fix his soul. He has to fix his soul. The soul has certain qualities, certain inclinations that have to do with the nature of the soul, and it comes into the world in a person's body in order to learn Mussar and to make changes in the person's soul by doing actions of the Hashem commanded in the Torah and halachas, and you learn Mussar to straighten out and fix the soul. That's one of the purposes Hashem sent the soul into the world. So you have those two qualities you see in Rabbeinu Yonah, to fix the soul and to purify it. So now the next thing I want to read, which is we're getting closer towards the end, is how do we understand that a little bit better, a bit more fully. So if we look in Orchos Tzadikim, is written in the time of the Rishonim, is very important, in the chapter of the fear of heaven, the Shar of Yirat Shemayim. So he defines the soul. He defines the soul, and we'll see. So he says over there, he says the soul is the fount of wisdom. It's the fount of wisdom. It resides in the mind like a king among its battalions. Etc., etc. And what does he say? He says it generates wisdom and knowledge. The soul generates wisdom and knowledge for the person, and continues, and he says, in all of its thoughts, all the thoughts of the soul, of a person's soul, the neshama, are what? To serve the Holy One, blessed be He, to serve Him, etc. And he continues a little bit more, and one other point he brings in the Sefer of Orchos HaTzadikim from the Rishonim. So in the chapter of the fear of heaven, the gates, Shar Yirat Shemayim, he defines what is the neshama of the soul. And what does he say over there? He says the neshama is the font of wisdom. It's the base of wisdom in a person's being, etc. Now he speaks a little bit more and more, but I want to bring out the point that he says it generates wisdom and knowledge. And it says, and all of its thoughts are to serve the Holy One, blessed be He, etc., etc., to serve the Holy One, blessed be He, etc., etc. And the last thing that it's thinking about is, he says, how the soul, the neshama, will return in purity and tahara to Him, Hashem, who created it, who created the neshama, and placed it in His body. So you see that Orchos HaTzadikim explains very clearly why it means to fix the soul and to purify it. It's because the soul itself, your soul itself, wants to go back to a Kodesh Baruch who created it in purity. So to go back in purity and to have the wisdom to do that, you have to learn Mussar in order to purify and fix the soul. That your soul, Hashem sent it into the world in the body you're in right now. So you see that from Orchos HaTzadikim from the Rishonim. Now, the last thing we want to say is a quote again from the Chaim about his life. You say over here, what does it say over here? The Chaim says over here, he says in chapter 68 in the book of the life of the Chaim, he says like this, he says, there was a time every day that the Chaim would withdraw himself into solitude. He would speak aloud in his devotion to Hashem. He might weep in consideration of his own moral defects. Okay, good, etc. He said, how do we know how do we know this? He says, because there were individuals who sometimes stood outside the door in awe of the sage, and they're listening to his precious words. So they heard this, okay. So So now he continues. He says, in the closing years of life, the Hafetzhaim, he favored the attic, his attic in his house, as a room, his room of retreat. Alone in the attic, he tried to commune with his Creator. He would say, the Hafetzhaim would say, a person who has sense is obligated every day to strive more to improve himself. Continue, he says, in addition to his custom of secluding himself, he also kept a journal in which he entered his spiritual accounting every day, so he'd be able to examine the records at a time and seek contrition for every failure. So you see clearly the Hafetzhaim had his own Mussar room. He had his own Mussar in his own house. He had his house, and he used one part of his house for a Mussar room. It's very clear from the Hafetzhaim. So you see, even if a person doesn't have, like here, this Mussar room that's built exclusively for that, we need an exclusive place. It's secluded, it's quiet. It gives a person the opportunity to go deep into themselves and to learn Mussar, study, to affect their souls and to be sensitive to connect to Hashem in the maximum way. So if you don't have a Mussar room, so you create one in your own house like the Hafetzhaim did. So you see that so we can learn from, like we said before, you learn from the great rabbis. When they do an action, like the Hafetzhaim, he used his house, one section of his house, for a Mussar room, so you can do the same thing if you don't have a Mussar room yourself. So I really want to bless everybody and to recognize that mamish, that we're children of Hashem. That it says clearly in the Torah. It says that Hashem said in the pasuk in the Torah, it says we're banim l'kodesh baruch hu. We're children of Hashem. We're mamish. We're spiritually children of Kodesh Baruch Hu, and he sent each one of our souls into the world to fix ourselves and purify each soul and return to Him in the heavens with the purity that He wants us to achieve in this lifetime. So I want to encourage everyone to learn Mussar every day and to realize why it's valuable and why it's worthwhile, because it's going to be the basis to purify yourself and make yourself the best maximum you could be, to be close to Hashem in the next world when you did all this work. B'ezrat Hashem, I'm speaking from my heart, and I really want to bless everybody for this blessing, and we should, B'ezrat Hashem, be merited and blessed that we could succeed in this way of learning Mussar and in the Mussar room and improving ourselves and purifying ourselves, raising ourselves to the heights of our soul, what we could through the learning of Mussar, B'ezrat Hashem. Thank you.